After an insane offseason at the quarterback position, it brings me great pleasure to finally say that the Rattlers are getting close to finding their starting QB. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your team every day. I, of course, am Darrion Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current site expert at Who Dat Dish and contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make it Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. As we wrap up today's episode, we'll take a look at Edward Waters adding yet another former D1 head coach to their coaching staff. Brian Jenkins clearly has a type with the additions he's bringing to the team. In segment 2, we're going to take a look at Tennessee State because they have lost yet another high-profile player, and it's clear that all of the hype, I really should say any of the hype, stems from their coaching staff. And I'll make that distinction on why I said that in segment 2. But we kick this whole thing off with FAMU finally getting close to having a starting quarterback. It's going to be RJ Johnson or Jet Petty. I've been waiting to say this. I have been waiting to say this because if you follow this show all off season, I know I have new everydayers and I have everydayers who have been here for years. Shout out to both of you. But if you've been following this show through the off season, one of the things that really had me confused, really had me just absolutely lost for words at times, was the quarterback situation with Florida A&M. It was ever expanding. It felt like every single week you got a new quarterback that was added to the roster. And it made me question my conventional wisdom, which is you pick up a quarterback after spring practice is over. That guy is in the lead to be your starter. Did Johnson and Petty both come to this team after spring practice? Yes. But were they alone in that? No. And that's where things get a little bit tricky because they brought in so many new quarterbacks, right? If you're going through the list, you had RJ Johnson, RJ Mays, Tyler Jefferson, Jet Petty, Lawrence Wright IV, and CJ Montez. That's 6 new quarterbacks. And I think Jefferson may have been the only one that wasn't brought in new. Maybe Mays as well. So Mays and Jefferson were present during spring practice, but you just had so many new quarterbacks. And to me, it wasn't going to be a quality quarterback competition for the Rattlers. That's my stance. I don't know if I just flat out said it before, but I just didn't think you could do it because I don't think that you can do it with so many quarterbacks. But I've got some more information. Shout out to Gerald Thomas. He always does great work at the Tallahassee Democrat. We've had him on the show before. And I was reading one of his articles about the quarterback situation. And as soon as I read that with FAMU, I jumped to it. I don't care what. Click the link. I'm checking it out because I need to know what's going on here. And I got a lot more clarity. And I think things are honestly being worked a lot more clearly than I expected them to be. And in that article, there was an announcement that essentially, I won't say announcement, but if you read between the lines, James Colzie essentially announced that it's a two-man race. He'll never come out and say that. He said that it's wide open, but it's a two-man race if you listen to what he said. And I'll read it to you. But the things that gave me clarity and gave me a little bit more faith is you had Montez, who decommitted. So that obviously, that was, in my opinion, that was the snowball that led to all of this. But Montez decommitted. Then you had Mays and Wright, who changed positions. And I like that way more. Because I didn't even tell you about players who are already on the team. I just told you about new additions this offseason, and primarily most of these guys were after the spring. But when you take Mays out of the conversation, you take Wright out of the conversation, now you're looking at things a whole lot differently, right? So you have RJ Johnson, Tyler Jefferson, and Jet Petty. Instead of throwing the football, Wright and Mays are going to be catching the ball. And I like both of these because I think that both of these transfers, or excuse me, position changes were handled well. You have Mays, who's coming in from high school athlete. You make him a wide receiver. He's got an 84 number. You look at Lawrence Wright, the fourth, he's 243 pounds. I think that was his exact number. He was in the 240s. And there's not going to be many 240 plus quarterbacks. It just isn't. So I think his size and putting him at tight end, it kind of makes sense. And he has the athleticism. All right, cool. We can work with that. If ever FAMU needs to have an Alabama State situation where they have to dig beyond their quarterback room to find somebody who passes the ball, they have enough people. You can bring Wright in. You can bring Mays in. So you can have a situation like Alabama State had and feel a little bit of confidence, as much confidence as possible when you get that far down the depth chart and have to dig into a different position. But then secondly, with Mays at wide receiver and Wright at tight end, I think it does open the door for some trick plays. I know that's not the conversation to be had at the moment because we need to focus on the starting quarterbacks, but Wright and Mays, both being former quarterbacks who are now playing different positions, it opens the door for trick plays. So you always want to watch that. Did the ball go backwards? Things of that nature. And then secondly, if they are in a situation like Alabama State was last year where they just have the quarterback room slaughtered due to injury, knock on wood, because you don't want that. But if it does happen, you can go get a guy like Wright and go get a guy like Mays. Now, Jefferson obviously is the odd man out. He's the guy that we're not talking about in this conversation. And unfortunately, it just seems like he lost that battle. It just seems as if he lost that battle to Wright and Petty. Or not Wright and Petty, but Johnson and Petty. So this is what Coach Colzie was saying. He says that RJ, talking about Johnson, obviously, because Mays has moved to a different position. But RJ and Petty kind of move themselves up a little, or move themselves a little up. He says it's still wide open, like I mentioned. But then also he says, but based on what happened Saturday, RJ and Jet moved up a little bit. And so that means when you move up, you do get some reps. They are going to get all the first team reps. This is me reading between the lines. This is me giving you what is said and then telling you how I interpret it. That's what I love to do on this show, because if I'm going to give you my opinion on something that was a quote, I would love to give you that too, so you can make your own opinion. Maybe you think I'm off base. Maybe you think that you read it a little differently than I do. But to me, when he says that based on what happened Saturday, RJ and Jet moved up a little bit. And so that means when you move up, you do get some reps. You moved past the crowd. Those are the guys who are sticking out. These are the guys who are going to be getting your first team reps. And quite frankly, this article is written on August 13th. That's 17 days, I think. 17 days before they finally kick off the season. So you're looking at 2.5 weeks. If 2.5 weeks before your first game, you don't know that you have two guys and you're still running a 3-4 man competition, I think you're failing. Because my biggest gripe was when I thought it was 7 players that were going to be in this quarterback battle is that there's only a certain amount of reps that you can get off, right? It's not about the amount of talent that you have. You could have a bunch of talented quarterbacks, but if they can't get the amount of reps necessary, you're not going to have any talented quarterbacks, right? So that was my biggest fear when it came to the FAMU quarterback battle. Now that you were at that time 17 days away from your regular season and you have it down to 2, I think you can go between Petty, you can go between Johnson, and you can have them take turns with the first team, either through the same practice or on alternating practices. You get first team reps, you get first team reps. But I'll just say this. For all of the apprehension that I had, for all of the concern that I had, as I'm seeing how FAMU has progressed through this quarterback battle, I have a little bit more confidence. I've said it before. When it looked like you're going to have almost 10 quarterbacks in this battle, I'm exaggerating, but not by much. When it felt like you were going to have a ton of quarterbacks in this battle, you, in my opinion, were setting yourself up for diminished results come week 1. Now that you're 2 weeks away, 2.5 weeks at the time of this article being written, away from quarterback, now that you're 2.5 weeks away from having your regular season kickoff and you're down to 2, I think you're in a much better position. I think that for me, I was very concerned that you would have too many cooks in the kitchen, you would get diminished results, and whoever was going to start wouldn't have enough reps. I think that even could have been the case with 3 quarterbacks in this battle. But instead, 2.5 weeks before they have their first game, you see FAMU thin it out. It's now at 2. It's Petty, it's Johnson. And when it comes to Petty, he had reps at the JUCO level. Johnson did not have reps. He comes over as a redshirt sophomore from Toledo, but he redshirted his first year, didn't see any action, and didn't see any action last year. So if you're talking experience, you got to go with Petty. If you're talking about, I don't know how Petty ended up at a JUCO, so I don't want to have this conversation about a ceiling. There's a lot of ways you can end up at a junior college, and not all of them are about talent, right? So I'm not even going to take that route. But when you look at Petty, he was a guy who he was really good, man. He averaged 270 yards per game, really strong touchdown to interception ratio at 23.5 or 23.5, 23 to 5. That's nearly 5 to 1. That's nearly 5 to 1. And honestly, completion percentage, you probably want to see that bumped a little bit from 59%. But all in all, first team had a lot of success on the JUCO level. So this is going to be a very interesting battle, but I'm happy that they're down to 2. Now, FAMU, you can have a real quarterback battle. And I wonder how long these guys have been separating. But this is the other thing that was said. Excuse me. I want to get this quote off. Where is this quote from Coach Burris? Here we go. And he even said it even further. He says, I've got to give 2 guys kind of the edge right now when it comes to Jet Petty and RJ Johnson. These kids are going out battling. When one guy makes a throw, the next guy is like, oh my gosh, I got to match that. Then he comes back and makes a throw. So boom, these guys have the edge. Let's separate that right there. But I'll tell you what's probably the most impressive thing is, or the most indicative thing, is that this quote right here. Now you're starting to see their voices lift because they know in order for us to succeed, the quarterback has to take control. Once you start having guys in the locker room who are taking on leadership positions, you're starting to find your quarterback. They're starting to separate on the field. They're starting to separate off the field. So you had up to 7 quarterbacks who could have been in this conversation at one point. Now, 2 weeks before the season kicks off, you're down to 2. This is exactly where FAMU needs to be, and I'm glad they got here. I have my concerns. I have my apprehensions, but I think they're handling this the best way that they could. Now, we push forward. We're going to go ahead and take a look at Tennessee State, who they're also losing or narrowing, but they're losing talent. So it's not in a good way like FAMU was. Let's break down that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. Preseason is already heating up, and college football isn't far behind. We got action on Saturday in the HBCU sphere. So whether you got your eye on a big-name quarterback or maybe a breakout running back, Prize Picks makes it easy to get into the game. If I were you, I'm keeping my eye on Joe Burrow. Not because I'm a big Joe Burrow fan, which I am, but because he has a terrible defense. So if you're looking for passing yards, focus on him and never go low. It's easy. All you have to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. And if you get your picks right, you could cash in and win up to 2,000 times your money. Yes, 2,000 times your money. I use Prize Picks occasionally, and I'm not as lucky, I'll be honest with you, but I try to get better. The flex pay option is a total game changer because even when one of your picks misses, you still doubled your money. Download the Prize Pick app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, run your game. Today's episode is also brought to you by Drip Drop. So if you're trying to stay on top of your routine, or maybe you're just focused on workouts, long days on campus, trying to stay focused through back-to-back classes, or maybe you have a long shift at work, hydration is where it all starts. And that's where Drip Drop comes in to play. Drip Drop is doctor developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium, electrolytes, and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly and delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of the leading sports drink. That's the part that I understand. I'm not a science major. All I know is it gives me 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar. I know that's good and good. So my go-to flavor for me, it always tends to vary. I don't really have a go-to flavor. It tends to vary for me, but Drip Drop is a place you got to go. So right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head to dripdrop.com and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. Every day for your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked on NFL so you can keep up with everything that's happening in the preseason and also leading up to the regular season. Man. Listen, I know that Tennessee State is a team that we're all going to have our eye on. I know that Tennessee State is a team that we want to see what they're going to do in 2025. But I'd say any of the hype that comes from Tennessee State kind of stems from the coaching staff and the coaching staff alone. The reason I change it from any or from all to any is because I don't feel like it's a lot of hype. I don't feel like the Tigers necessarily have a lot of hype because who really knows what they're going to be? And I could do the whole all to any, but I did that in the tease in the opener, so I wouldn't do it again. But the truth of the matter is, any of the hype that you see from Tennessee State, how much of it actually comes from the talent? How much of it actually comes from the team that you think they're going to field in 2025? I'd say none of it. I'd say none. And the departure of Camani Cobb, I know we're talking about players leaving right now. That's crazy to me. But the departure of Camani Cobb this past weekend, it really hammered home. Like, man, these guys are deficient as far as returning talent goes. They got a lot of guys in the transfer portal, but if you're new, let me just tell you, I always address transfer portal guys as a bit of a question mark. Of course, there's exceptions, so let me not say always because I was high on the Trey Holly train immediately. I didn't need anything for that. But for the most part, I'm typically wait and see mode with transfers. And when you have a ton of transfers, I'm always wait and see because I just feel like it takes time to mesh. I feel like there's a cohesion that goes into the team that when you're just picking a bunch of guys and it's their first year together, it can be difficult to gauge. So I'm not saying that it can't work or that it won't work. But what I will say is that there's so many moving pieces as far as talent goes. To be doing that under a new head coach, I understand why nobody expects them to succeed. I think that it's difficult for me to predict their success, but it's also difficult for me to predict their failure. And that's elite fence straddling. I understand that. That's elite fence straddling on my part. But I also think that it's appropriate. I try not to straddle the fence too often. But at the same time, I'm not just going to jump out there just to say something. I don't think that Tennessee State has enough knowns for me. And Camani Cobb's departure really highlighted that because I saw Blue Bloods on Twitter, that's where I saw it at first from him. And he talked about how there's only 5 key contributors that are returning to Tennessee State and how he defined a key contributor was a player who played 200 snaps. Now, that's not a lot of snaps at all. Like if you play 5 games and you're a starter and you play the majority of it, you're going to probably cross that 200 snap threshold. If you take all 13 of the games that Tennessee State played last year and you just chop them up evenly, that's about 15 a game. And you have to do a couple of 16s, right? But that's a game where, or that's a player who really doesn't have to play a lot of snaps for TSU in 2024. But okay, cool. That's the threshold. If that's that low of a bar and you still only have 5 players who hit it, that tells you just how many players that they lost. That tells you right there. And when you look at the guys who are coming back, they're not in premier positions. And I don't try to place too much value on the premier position conversation because to me, they all work together, right? But offensive tackle, edge rusher, wide receiver, quarterback, and cornerback are the positions that people highlight as premier positions because that's kind of protecting the quarterback, catching the ball from the quarterback, attacking the quarterback, stopping the guys who are catching the ball from the quarterback. If we're talking about this being a passing game nowadays, that's kind of where this all stems from. But for me, you have a guard coming back. You have a safety coming back. You have a couple of defensive tackles coming back. And I can't remember where that last guy plays. But you're not hitting the premier positions and you're losing premier players. Forget positions because Sanders Ellis isn't technically a premier position. And were my air quotes high enough? Right. But he's a premier player. And I think middle linebacker should be a premier position with all of the vocalizing that you have to do, for all of the leadership that you have to do, all of the things that go into being a starting middle linebacker and being the voice of a defense. To me, that is a premier position. I think that's unfair. Same with center. There's so much that goes into playing center, especially if you don't have a top flight quarterback. But now I'm getting on my soapbox. So when you look at the deficiency from returning talent, and I like Kendrick Grimes, who's coming out of the portal. So I don't want to just say that nobody's talented on that team. I'm talking about guys who are returning. When you look at the lack of it, it all focuses on the coaches. But when you think about it, the reason that we're excited about Tennessee State is Reggie Barlow. The reason we're excited about Tennessee State is Greg Williams. It's Shannon Harris, right? Like, these are the things that we're looking at. We're looking at a UFL championship winning coach. We're looking at a guy who is one of the more notable names on the defensive side of the football when it comes to coaching over the last generation. And you're looking at somebody who's had wide span success at a couple of different universities. So the coaching does give you a little bit of optimism for what they can be. For me, I think that they're in good hands. Whether that good hands start is 2025 or if it's 2026, I don't know. But I do think that Reggie Barlow is going to get this path corrected. And when I say corrected, I really feel like the departures kind of changed things, right? Like Eddie George and everybody was going this way, and then all the departures said, we're going that way. So we're going to course correct now that you have Reggie Barlow on the team. But I want to bring up a quote from Jared Cruz, who says, "Our philosophy has always been that the players will follow you if they believe you can help them improve." Talking about Greg Williams, Greg has turned more undrafted free agents into Pro Bowlers than just about anyone in the last 25 years. That's development. That's what we're bringing to TSU, finding each player's strength and holding them accountable to it. That's why we're excited. Now, Cruz talks about the depth in the secondary. It's not a lot of returning star power, but if we're talking about development, I do trust that Greg Williams can do that. If we're talking about getting players who maybe aren't as well known and getting the most out of them, I think that Greg Williams and his scheme can do that. But once again, we're not talking about a lot of players of, man, I can't wait to see that guy play. It's more so I can't wait to see what Greg Williams does with this defense. I can't wait until Shannon Harris steps on the field along with Coach Morgan to lead this offense. I can't wait to see if Reggie Barlow is able to have quick success here in a very similar fashion that he had at Virginia State. These are the conversations we're having. But think about every time that you've been excited about something related to Tennessee State in 2025. It's always been connected to a coach. It's always been connected to a coach. And the only reason that really matters is because coaching comes with culture, and culture doesn't always happen immediately. So does that culture get established, and does the wins start coming in 2025? That's really the question. Who knows? But talking about culture and former head coaches, we're talking about Edward Waters, who ironically is Coach Morgan's former team. They've added yet another former head coach to their coaching staff. Let's break it down as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Open Phone. And if you're running a business, every time that you missed a call, you missed out on some money. That's money left on the table, because think about it. When's the last time that you needed something done, you called, they didn't answer, you said, I'm going to hit them back in 30 minutes? Doesn't happen. Just doesn't happen often. You move on. And that's why you need Open Phone, so you never miss an opportunity to connect with your customers. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system designed to streamline and scale your customer communications. Listen, you ain't Kevin Gates. You don't need 2 phones for your business. It's not necessary, right? Go ahead and get Open Phone so you no longer have to do it. Matter of fact, your whole team can share a line with Open Phone. So no more who's handling this, who's handling that. See why over 60,000 businesses trust Open Phone. They're offering Locked On listeners 20% off for your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedoncollege. That's openphone.com/lockedoncollege. They'll even port over your existing numbers for free. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. Ernest Wilson III is yet another former head coach that is joining the Edward Waters coaching staff. I find this very interesting because we always talk about Toriano Morgan and him bringing along Brian Jenkins. I've referenced that now, I think 2, maybe 3 times. I think it's 2. But what's interesting to me is that Jenkins is taking a very similar approach, except he's on steroids. He's not on steroids, but the idea, the concept is on steroids. But Brian Jenkins Jr. or Brian, I don't know if it's junior or not, but Brian Jenkins is bringing on Coach Dooley, who we did talk about last week. And then also now he's bringing on Coach Ernest Wilson III. And what's interesting to me is that that's now 3 former Division I head coaches that you have on this roster. You now have on the staff 3 former Division I head coaches, 3 guys who have won Coach of the Year. So I know Dooley gets a lot of slander, and honestly, I understand. I think those last 2 years for him have been really bad for his reputation. Can he rebuild it at Edward Waters? We'll see. But Edward Waters has Brian Jenkins as the head coach. Bethune-Cookman, great tenure at Bethune-Cookman. I mean, phenomenal tenure at Bethune-Cookman. 3-time MEAC Coach of the Year. He gets to Alabama State. It wasn't as great. But you look at what he did at Bethune, you still feel like, okay, that's somewhere in there, right? And it's lovely when you succeed quickly because people always feel like we can unlock that. And that goes for players, that goes for coaches, that goes for anything. If you can show potential in an area, people want to see what you can be. But then you have Dooley, who at Southern and PV led his teams to SWAC championship berths. Back-to-back seasons, first year at Southern, last year at PV. They made it to the SWAC championship game. In 2021, he was a regional coach of the year. He shared that title with another coach, but he never won the SWAC because, Prime was there, so it's too bad. And then you had Ernest Wilson, who he won Coach of the Year at Elizabeth City State. Now, that is a Division II school, but he started his first head coaching tenure at Savannah State while they were in the MEAC. So before they went to the SIAC, he was coaching them in the MEAC. And he actually never coached them when they were a Division II team. When he joined, they were in the MEAC. When he left, they were in the MEAC. So this is 3 different coaches who all signed on, all said, we're going to join this staff. Wilson, special teams coordinator. You have Dooley, offensive coordinator. Jenkins, he's the head coach, obviously interim. I had to go look to see who the defensive coordinator was. It's Darren Hayes, who ironically, he came in right after Jenkins left at Bethune-Cookman, and he had a great track record as far as defense goes. He has interceptions. He has touchdowns. That's very exciting when you have a coach who has a knack for scoring or getting touchdowns out of his team. They were just a really good defense at Bethune-Cookman. So he's not a former head coach, but he is somebody who has an expertise. So 2 former head coaches on your coordinator circle. 1 former head coach is your interim head coach, and you have a guy who has a great track record as a defensive mind as your defensive coordinator. This is a really solid coaching staff that they're starting to bring up here at Edward Waters. I can't wait to see what comes from it. I think that having so many coaches, former head coaches on your coaching staff allows you to really be helicopter. That's what I really think it is Brian Jenkins, though this is just an interim season, he is building his coaching staff as if he's going to be the long-term head coach. And I think he's building his coaching staff, and it's going to bolster his odds of being the long-term head coach, to be honest. But in general, Brian Jenkins is building the staff not like he's an interim, like this is his first year of a multi-year deal. And by having Dooley as the offensive coordinator, by having Wilson as a special teams coordinator, having an expert like Hayes as your defensive coordinator, Jenkins should just be able to float. He should. Dooley's the former head coach. He should be able to handle the offense. I know. I think that Wilson, being a former head coach, should be able to handle his unit on the special teams. Having former head coaches simply gives you more leniency because it gives you less responsibility. You don't have to go micromanage this part of the offense or this part of the special teams unit. And even though Hayes isn't a former head coach, you don't have to go micromanage this part of the defense. I think that Brian Jenkins will be able to float and just say, be like this, touch this up, touch that up. He gets to just be a delegator. And I think that is a great position for head coaches who don't want to call plays. Just be a delegator, but you have to build your staff to let you do that. And it feels like Jenkins has already started to do that. Now, on tomorrow's episode, we're going to get specific. I told you guys, we're down. We're down to the last 3 days. Friday is going to be the game of the week, all MEAC SWAC challenge talk. But tomorrow, I think we're going to talk about the biggest question for Southern. Either Southern or North Carolina Central will be the conversation of tomorrow. Actually, probably the Eagles. Yeah, probably the Eagles. But in the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.